In this video, I will demonstrate a quick way of being able to generate colored squares on your chessboard that are dark and light colored wood, as well as these seams between the squares that make it appear that each of these is an individual piece of wood that has been laid down and glued onto the chessboard. So, to begin with, we'll select this polygon, which is the playing field. We'll make a material and apply it to that. And for that material, we'll double click on it, go to the colored tab here in the texture channel. We'll open it up with this small white triangle. Go down to surfaces, go to checkerboard, and click on checkerboard. As you can see, that will apply checkers onto the surface. 4 huge checkers. We need to change that. So one way to do it would be to single click on the material tag, texture tag, to bring up the projection panel. Right now the projection is UVW mapping. We want that to be flat. And when that happens, you can see that now the texture has changed to these 2 large rectangles. We need to readjust that, and so in order to get this in the proper orientation, we need to activate the texture mode, which will bring up this wireframe representation of how the texture is being projected onto the surface. And as you can see, the checker pattern is being projected through the blue axis, which is what causes the checkers here to be stretched out. And so we simply need to rotate this texture map so that it's facing downward. So we just activate the rotate tool, begin our rotation, hold down shift, and move it in 90-degree increments, or 10-degree increments until we get to 90 degrees. Now we've got our 4 squares back, and we need to make them smaller, so we will scale them with our scale tool and scale them in. So we got 8 checkers per side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's the correct number. Same thing going the other way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the black checker is in the lower left-hand corner where it needs to be. So we return to our model mode, and there our checkers have been placed. Now, of course, we want to change these so that they are not black and white squares, but rather colored wood texture, as we can see here. In order to do that, we need to double click on our texture tag to bring up this panel, and then go to texture channel, click on the thumbnail, which will take us to this panel where we can define our checker color. And of course we don't want just regular colors here, so we will, and you can of course click on one of these color swatches and choose any color that you want, but we don't want these types of colors, so let's go back to our texture channel, left click on the little white triangle, brings up this menu, and we want to select layer. So now nothing changes here, but we now have a possibility of adding multiple layers to our texture, our checkerboard panel. So now we click on this thumbnail, and it takes us to this panel where we have the opportunity to add some images into our scene. So the checkerboard is the pattern that we're starting out with. We click on image, which allows us to navigate to where we have some color, some wood stored. So I'm going to go with the light colors first. So I'll use spruce. Take the spruce and open that up. Reply yes. And now you can see that that spruce texture has covered all of our board, which we don't want, of course. And so the way we get our black checkers back, our dark checkers, is to change the blending mode from normal to multiply. Now we've got the light wood texture on the light colored squares, the white squares. And now we want to do the same kind of thing and apply a dark wood to the black squares. So we go back to this panel, click on image once again, navigate to where we start our wood textures. We'll use teak for the dark. Click on unfinished teak in this case, open that up, say yes again, and it's going to cover over our entire surface just like before. But now we go back to our panel and change the blend mode from normal to lighten. So now we've got dark wood in the black squares and light wood in the white squares, which is what we're after. And you can see as you look at the wood grain on our squares here that it does repeat over and over, but it does alternate based upon what rank you're in here. So it looks fairly believable. Okay, so now we have looking pretty good. And just a comment here is that I don't know of any way to add bump maps to these. Maybe someday I'll figure that out, but right now just leave those just colored. Don't worry about the bump map for the squares. But now what I want to do is try to get these seams seem to be dividing the squares from each other to make them look more three-dimensional and physical. Now the way that we're going to do that is to go back to our material and click on Basic and add a bump channel. Then go to Bump, go to the Texture channel in the Bump Properties, open that up, go down to Surfaces again, but this time instead of choosing checkerboard or whatever, we're going to choose Tiles. Now Tiles is a texture that is procedural texture that's intended to try to make a colored surface. It looks like tiles, like for a kitchen countertop or whatever. But as if you look carefully at our scene here, you can see little small squares, indentations on the surface of the light colored squares that begin to give us an opportunity to see the possibilities for perhaps creating a seam by using this procedural. So in order to do that, we click on the thumbnail and we're going to leave the pattern at squares. Don't need to worry about the tile color because we're not using the color in this case. Instead, we're using a bump map, which will take advantage of this grout color, which is black. So that's the line between the gray and red squares, and if we can make those lines large enough in scale, we can make them fit around each one of these squares instead of filling the square full of little tiny squares. So we're going to go down to the global scale. Just through experimentation, I found that 500% here will be the proper size. So now notice that the patterns have disappeared because now each of those squares, the large, as you can see here in the thumbnail, are fitting exactly around each one of these squares here. And you can't really tell at this point because we need some more definition to make the bump map work. But keep in mind the idea behind a bump map is that black is recessed. And so that's the very thing that we need, is to make it look like these grout lines are recessed into the surface. So in order to get that to work, grout width and bevel width are the values that we need to work with. Now, in order to be able to see this better, we need to do an interactive render, and you'll be able to see the effect better. So you can see the bevel here is very wide, too wide. And so we need to reduce the bevel, and you just get this through experimentation, but reduce the bevel down to something like 2%. And you can see it sharpen up here. So we've got sharper bevels now, and you can decide how sharp to make those. Maybe you want to go even 1%. This depends on how much of a, let that finish rendering, depends on how much of a bevel you want here. And then the grout width is how wide this bevel is. 5% is too much, so maybe 2%. You can see that sharpening up. Okay. But still not looking good. Looks like there's kind of a thick groove between the squares here. So in order to make this work better, you need to go down to the delta and change it from 100% to something like 5%. That should tighten those up. So now you got a tighter groove there. Maybe it needs to be a little bit more. Let's go 10% and see what that does. Gives a little bit wider groove. You'll be able to see this better if we drop a light into our scene and place it so it creates some shadows on the surface. Now you can see light catching the edges of our grooves here. And then if it's not pronounced enough, we can go back to our material, back to the bump, and notice that the bump strength is 20% by default. The lower this value is, then the shallower these grooves will appear to be. And if you go into the negative range, then the grooves will actually appear to be kind of projecting upward, which we don't want. So we're going to take that and increase our strength to try to create a little bit deeper grooves. And so there we go. Now if we just do a render, let's bring our picture viewer up here where it's nice and large. You can see that now we have our colored tiles with simulated grooves between them. So I hope that helps.